It was in this capacity he was elected as Ballarat Trades Hall President and then was elected as Secretary. Theatre has never quite left Brett. He combined it with his deep love of history, becoming fascinated by historical storytelling. Brett believes that working for a trades hall with a 163-year history means it's impossible to map the future without having a deep knowledge of the past. Please welcome Brett.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, brothers and sisters, for being here today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the custodians of the land on which we meet, the Wathaurong people of the Great Kulin Nation. Pay my deepest respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to all of the mob. And I acknowledge this land was stolen, never ceded. And for our nation to heal, we must fully embrace and realise the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I thank the Eureka Centre today for the 165th commemoration and acknowledge Jenny Beacham speaking for the Charter. So, why is the Southern Cross the most important artefact of Eureka? Let's begin at the beginning. The people and ideas that created the flag had never ever intended or envisaged the flag would end up flying on the Eureka lead, to be torn down by Trooper King, paraded and tramped into the dirt by forces of Her Majesty's Police and Soldiery. At a meeting of Bakery Hill on the 11th of November 1854, a motion was moved to establish a large tent for the purposes of the Ballarat Reform League, for meetings, for signing up new members and for receiving dues. Captain Ross, a Canadian, credited with designing the flag, and there's still conjecture as to whether the blue and white cross was inspired by the prayer flag flying on the St. Alepius Chapel, the Cornish flag, or whether it was simply a leap from the cross formed by the stars of the Southern Cross to the white cross of the flag, the blue being either the colour of dawn sky or the blue of the trousers worn by most of the miners on the Ballarat field. The flag was intended to fly over the Reform League tent and to be present at its meetings, like that held on the 29th of November 1854 on Bakery Hill, where it was first unfurled. Now this all changed on the morning of the 30th of November 1854, when the government camp, on intelligence from the meeting of the night before that diggers had burnt their licences, called the cruellest, most brutal and most divisive digger hunt to date across the gravel pits. Mid-afternoon on the 30th of November, diggers, this time spontaneously, assembled on Bakery Hill after the harassment of police and forces. And the physical force proponents rose and the moral force proponents withdrew, because as we know, nothing convinces like a lick in the lug. The Southern Cross flag was taken from Bakery Hill to the Eureka Lead, where a stockade was roughly thrown up as a means of defence against further digger hunts. Back to Bakery Hill briefly, where an oath of allegiance was sworn under it, and finally back to the Eureka Lead and the stockade, where we all know the rest of the story. The Eureka story has always been two stories, or even more, different threads woven into the fabric of the digger's tale for freedom, the moral force and the physical force. After the 29th of November 1854, one took over from the other, leading to the brutality of the 3rd of December. That's the facts of the journey of the flag. But I hold that the flag of the Southern Cross is the most important artefact of Eureka because it is an unfinished story. In so many ways, it is yet still to play its part. It is still unfinished business. The flag itself is a deeply visceral symbol. It speaks to a deep subconscious level in each and every one of us. I challenge anyone viewing the flag, its size, the powerful yet simpleness of its design, not to feel something. And if any of you have had the privilege to witness a full-size replica of the flag hoisted high at sunrise on the 3rd of December, you will know the feeling of the hairs standing on the back of your neck and an involuntary tear running down your cheek. Symbols speak to us, bypassing language and culture, to a deep, ancient and subconscious part of our mind. Raphael Carboni describes it beautifully. The Southern Cross was hoisted up the flagstaff, a very splendid pole, 80 feet in length, straight as an arrow. The maiden appearance of our stand in the midst of armed men, sturdy, self-overworked gold diggers of all languages and colours, was a fascinating object to behold. There is no flag in old Europe half as beautiful as the Southern Cross of the Ballarat miners. First hoisted on the old spot, Bakery Hill. The flag is silk, blue ground with a large silver cross, similar to the ones of our southern firmament. No device or arms, but all exceedingly chaste and natural. For millennia, the Southern Cross stars have held a deep meaning for mankind living in the Southern Hemisphere. For our First Nations people, it sits just near the neck of the dark emu in our Milky Way. And for over 60,000 years, it has guided our First Nations people and their songlines. It had a profound significance in ancient South American Incan society and culture. And for Europeans travelling to the Antipodes, it was the first sign of passing the equator, when the night sky changed and the Southern Cross rose on the horizon. On a ship for months, in the vast featureless ocean, it was a sign of change, of things to come, of passing into a new and alien place, of a life left behind and of a new life beckoning. And on the goldfields, as the diggers lie under the night sky in their patch of mud on Ballarat, surrounded by forests stretching away forever and staring up to the Southern Cross and the Milky Way, stretching from horizon to horizon, freedom must have never felt so close. And with the gold beneath their feet, emancipation was only a shovel full of dirt away. But up on the hill, initially at Golden Point, and then at the camp on City Hill, the fence compound of the troopers and soldiers served as a brutal reminder of the hand of the British Empire and the rigid class structures and deadly force used to retain order and to protect the world of the cashed-up and classed elites with their ribbons, lace and fancy titles. Down in the digging, in the mud, class was forgotten, and people judged by their ability and willingness for hard work and sweat. In the flimsy canvas tents, accountants shared with convicts and engineers shared with unemployed labourers. They shared the work and the reward, and fierce friendships were forged in this strange and harsh land. The Southern Cross is a flag of unity, a symbol for all groups, from our First Nations people to our country's newest arrivals. A symbol of the great Australian trinity of mateship, egalitarianism and of fair go. The foundation story of the Australian collective subconscious and an emblem of hope. Once again, in the words of Raphael Carboni, I call upon all diggers, irrespective of nationality, religion or colour, to salute the Southern Cross as a refuge from all the oppressed from all countries on earth. The flag of the Southern Cross belongs to all Australians. In Trades Hall, there's a beautiful and profound artwork by Peter Clark, combining the Aboriginal and the Southern Cross flags. I truly believe it would make a great national flag. For a sense on how important the Southern Cross flag is, have a look at those who over the years who have tried to hijack its symbolism and distort its meaning. Recently with the fascists like Rise Up Australia subverting the symbol for their ugly ends. This has nothing to do with the argument, but it's important. Extreme right-wing groups always look to the story of Lambing Flat riots for the use of the flag. But I strongly hold the Lambing Flat flag's based on the Scottish St Andrew's flag device and not the Cornish flag device or St Michael's cross of the Southern Cross. They are two very different devices, sharing elements, but entirely separate and unconnected. Monarchists have tried to muddy the waters with their story of the Eureka Jack, that the Southern Cross flag was flown with the Union Jack flag, an argument for which there's no evidence and a great deal of evidence against. And political apologists have tried to subvert the story of Eureka to make it one of small business owners revolting against unfair red tape and taxation, for which, to craft such a narrative, you have to conveniently ignore significant parts of the Eureka story and agitations on other goldfields. So we can only take the flag to mean the intentions of its creators and the first people who unfurled it and spoke at its first outing, and the words of Raphael Carboni, a refuge for all the oppressed from all countries on earth. And I say once again, the flag belongs to everyone, except to those people who would not embrace its true meaning and those to seek to subvert the symbol for hate. The flag also embraces and includes the story of our Goldfields women. The flag was sewn by three local women, Anastasia Withers, Anne Duke and Anastasia Hayes. And the incredible story and achievements of these women also adds to the significance of this flag and the unity of its symbolism. Now, the killer argument of why the Southern Cross flag is the preeminent artefact, if you need a killer argument, is this one. At the treason trials of the 13 men after Eureka in early 1855, there is no mention of the Charter. After it was presented to Governor Hotham, he cracked it at the delegation because they'd used the words demand, and then simply wrote in pencil in the margins of the Charter, put away. But the 13 men who stood trial for treason after Eureka were charged with arranging themselves in a warlike manner against the forces of Her Majesty's the Queen and assembling under a certain flag. So to the government, the flag and the oath sworn to it were the clenchers that would see these men charged with treason and threatened with death. In the words of the Age newspaper at the time, they described the flag as the Australian flag of independence. And this is why I think the flag is the most significant Eureka artefact, because it is unfinished business. This symbol of unity, this symbol speaks to us of all nations, or all our nations, this symbol speaks to all of our nation's tribes, and yet it is not the flag of our nation. It does not fly over an Australian republic. We still wrestle with it, but this is a flag that belongs to everyone, and as much to the past as to the future. The Charter did its work, bringing about reform of our legislature, but the flag story is not yet complete. This is why it is so divisive, and this is its brilliance. It pricks and it pushes and it goads us to live up to the ideals and intentions of its creators. The flag of the Southern Cross is a profound symbol, encapsulating what it truly means to be Australian. Mateship, egalitarianism, and a fair go for all. For over 60,000 years, the stars of the Southern Cross have guided generations of Australians in the great southern land. The flag has given us the mission statement, the oath. We, all of us, swear by the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other, together, and fight to defend our rights and our liberties. The flag is a reminder that our work is not done, and that one day the Southern Cross flag will fly over, in the words of Henry C. Camm of the Ballarat Times, a new Australian Congress.
Thank you, Brett. That was very compelling. Now, I was remiss in not mentioning that we have our local member, or member for Wendouree, Juliana Addison, with us. Thanks for coming, Juliana. Sitting up there next to Frank Williams, which also reminded me that we've got a lot of people with a deep connection to Eureka and people that have really been active in supporting the uptake in the commemoration of Eureka. There was certainly a period there when it had really died down, and many of the people in the room here have made Eureka what it is today, so thank you all. Our next speaker is Jenny Beacham, and Jenny will be speaking for the significance of the Charter. Jenny grew up in Beacham in country Victoria. She went to Melbourne University, worked as a teacher and then as Schools Commission consultant. Her involvement with the Australian Labor Party includes working as an electorate officer for Joan Kerner and in Premier John Cain's office and at the ALP head office. She was State Secretary of the Victorian branch of the ALP from 1990 to 1994. Jenny is married to a Ballarat boy and together they have 4 children. And she was once also the Lady Mayoress of Melbourne. I'm not finished yet, you can't get up. There's so much more. She is also currently a tourism operator in Hepburn Springs. She is, and this is the really interesting and important part, she is presently writing a doctorate through the Collaborative Research Centre in Australian History at Federation University. And the topic of her thesis is History of Ballarat Trades Hall and Labor Council, 1854, a very significant year, through to 2000. Please welcome Jenny. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll just get some water. Thank you, Anthony, for the opportunity. I do want to also acknowledge, as Brett did and Anthony has, that the owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurrung people of the Great Coolum Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. This land was stolen, never ceded. I would also like to thank Anthony for the opportunity and the Eureka Centre for regaining the place of Eureka as such a significant event. But Brett has reminded me about why the Charter gets second-class billing. The flag is like the racehorse. It's black caviar or Makybe Diva. Everywhere you go, the flag is. The good old Charter is like a team of draft horses, and I'm on the side of draft horses today. Those sturdy Clydesdales that I grew up with in the Mallee. When I was 8, Dad would say, take the horses back to the stable, a team of 12 Clydesdales, and I'd happily go back to the stable with them. I realised as I grew up, though, that, of course, the horses knew where they were going, and it didn't matter much what I did because I was only little and they could do what they liked. They always took me home, they always did the right thing. They went to their stall and they started their feeding on their own. So the Charter has very much been underestimated in its role in our culture. And I'll come back to that. But who knows where the Charter is today? If you wanted to go and see it this afternoon, where would you go? Anne's not allowed to answer. Anyone else? No, there's only one Charter. There's copies everywhere, but there's only one Charter.
There's a copy in Parliament House, Victoria, on the second floor.
Whereabouts?
Just opposite Federation.
Yes, well, the interesting thing is, there's a lot of copies, but where is the original? Does Brett know? No, Brett's got he's very proud of his copy. He's got a copy at Ballarat Trades Hall. No, that's just another copy.
No, sorry. It's a speech by someone else other than you, and he mentioned it, and it's at home, written down, I can't remember it, where did his name on his...
Well,
I think we've got to get back to now. Let's set some ground rules here.
I'm sorry about throwing that red head in.
You kind of open it up.
Yes, I did, and that's because it's a soapbox and I thought someone in the audience might be able to tell me. Okay, I won't. The Charter is actually held by the Public Records Office. It is occasionally on display at the State Library. I have seen it there, but when I looked on the State Library site, they don't indicate it as there at the moment. So I don't think there's anywhere this afternoon you could go and see the Charter. Now that's a bit of a condemnation of our regard for such an important document. As you see on the wall, it's handwritten on blue watermarked government paper, folded into 4 foolscap-sized pages. And it was adopted, as Brett has so clearly outlined for us by those miners on the 11th of November. But when they took it to Hotham, he dismissed them with disdain. And the original charter has disappeared. That charter that those miners took to him has disappeared. What we have left is a clerk's copy of the original, and the format of the original is unknown, but the clerk copied it on the blue watermark government paper, and it was created for administrative purposes for Hotham's office at the time. And there are notes on it, as you can see on the screen. There are notes on it that indicate Hotham did see it, and that was the copy that he actually marked as he read it. So the charter reminds me really of the Monty Python skit. What did the Romans ever do for us? The aqueduct? Oh, yeah, they did give us that. And the sanitation. Yeah, all right. I'll grant you the aqueducts and the sanitation. And the roads. Oh, well, the road, yeah, obviously the roads. We mean the roads go without saying, don't they? But apart from sanitation, the medicine, the education, the wine, public order, irrigation, a freshwater system and public health, what have the Romans ever done for us? Well, you could say the same thing about the Charter. What has the Charter ever done for us? By the 27th of March 1855, just 3 months after the rebellion, the Commission recommended sweeping changes to Goldfields administration: an end to the licence system, the introduction of the miners' right, which gave diggers the vote. For £1 a year, they were allowed to dig for gold anywhere, to vote in parliamentary elections, and they could reside on a quarter of an acre reserved for mining purposes. And they could elect delegates to local courts to settle disputes. That was a long way from where they'd been. So that conceded 5 of the Charter's demands. The new constitution, which was adopted in 1857, did consolidate those changes, and it did include some additional matters. Abolition of property qualifications for members of the Legislative Assembly, very important. The Legislative Council didn't get changes to its property qualifications until 1950. Secret ballot was introduced, manhood suffrage, and triennial parliaments. So just let's think about manhood suffrage. What is sometimes forgotten or not recognised, this is one of the earliest examples of universal white male suffrage in the world. I was going to ask another question here, Anthony, but I won't. By the end of the century, by 1900, what proportion of men had the vote in Europe? About 25% of all males at the end of that century. So France did have a little start. France had it for about 3 years after the 1848 revolution. But Napoleon III came along and declared himself king and sacked the parliament. So that was the end of their little exploration into manhood suffrage. In Great Britain, and this staggered me when I found this out, men who were fighting in the First World War did not have the vote. In Great Britain, until 1884, the vote was only property-based. It was extended then to include the head of a household of a person of a family in a rented property, just the head of the household, and that was then took it to about 60%. And they had to be over 21. So that was left with 40% in Great Britain of males who did not have the vote, and they only were given universal suffrage in 1918, when it did abolish all property qualifications for men, and did take a big step by introducing it for women over 30 who owned property. In the USA, white male suffrage was achieved in 1856, but quickly eroded, and in most states, and certainly for Afro-Americans, they were excluded in various ways. And they didn't really introduce universal male suffrage in the USA until 1962. They did that in 1962, as we did in 1962 when we gave the vote to Indigenous voters federally, not necessarily at the state level at that time, but including the Northern Territory elections. And of course, as we'll be reminded, I'm sure, the women were explicitly excluded from voting in Victoria, and only in 1902 did all women get the vote. Australia was the first country to give women the right to vote and run for office, and in 1908 the women of Victoria were given that. So we were leading the world. We were very significant in setting out those rules for universal participation in our democratic system. Aboriginal natives, I might say, were never explicitly referred to in the Victorian legislation, possibly through requirements of literacy or not receiving charity. And that would have excluded them without naming them. We could just ignore them. So in 2006, the Charter was inducted into the UNESCO Memory of the World Register of Significant Historical Documents, which makes it a bit sad we can't actually lay our hands on where we could go and see it today, but anyway. It is historically significant, and the database report on it says it is historically significant in the history of democracy in Victoria and as a central feature of the Eureka story, one of the most significant and influential events in Australia's political and social history. The struggle for democratic reform, as expressed in the Charter and the Eureka Rebellion, is of fundamental significance to our understanding of Australian society and democratic institutions. Now, some descendants of Eureka have done a great job in seeking recognition for it. They started by presenting copies to the Union. The Charter proclaimed two fundamental truths that give meaning to true democracy. The solemn words of the Charter say, "The people are the only legitimate source of all political power," and it's joined with the insistence that every citizen possesses an inalienable right to have a voice in making the laws he is called upon to obey. In giving you this copy, David Bendy said, I and the community of Ballarat express confident hope that you will find a source of strength in its word. Optimistic words they were, and they still resonate with us today. The people involved in the climate change movement, from Greta Thunberg to the Extinction Rebellion and the Knitting Nanas, they still believe in that principle. In fact, the young people who attended the recent climate rally in Ballarat got such a kick out of it, they marched the route 3 times. They were supposed to go around once, and they were having such fun they went round 3 times. So it can be fun too. So we do the people who fought for these rights, who wrote that charter, when they did, no service, and we thank them once a year for putting us at the forefront of that change. And that is why I think the Charter has to be recognised as one of the great icons of Australia, because it gave us that responsibility early, and it's been exercised in our history on many occasions. But democracy is fragile. It's creaking and groaning at the moment, threatening to burst. John Fain said in a recent Stephen Murray Smith lecture, populists, liars, racists and fanatics are putting democracy through a stress test. We have neglected basic democratic repairs. We need to look after the fundamentals. Publicly accountable politicians, election outcomes not shaped by the amount of money spent, an anti-corruption watchdog, regulators who reject cosy deals, and the media that holds power to account. Today, in 1850, people are displaced. In 2019, an unprecedented 70.8 million people have been forcibly displaced worldwide. In 1850, as Headley has just reminded us, and we're reminded by Clara Seecamp's editorial outside, they came here as refugees and adventurers, and they were looking for new hope. At the Eureka Rebellion, there were 101 miners officially counted, and they came from, only 4 were Australian born. The other 97 came from the West Indies, Canada, the United States, Sweden, Portugal, Spain, Switzerland, France, Holland, Russia, Germany, Corsica, Greece, Italy, Wales, Scotland, England. Now, that's a challenge for us. Thank you.
Well, once again, brilliant. And I think both our speakers have laid out the argument very effectively. Now, we have 2 speakers. I would like to remind you, there is no Q&A, there is no interjecting, there's no kind of banter with the speakers. After the first session, I'm really ready to just have 2 more speakers and then we'll finish up. So we've got 2 great speakers though, and our first speaker is Phillip Moore. These are the respondents, so they'll be responding to the argument laid down by both Brett and Jenny. And Phillip is a past president of Eureka Australia, an association for descendants of those involved in the events surrounding the Eureka Stockade. He is chairman of the Melbourne Celtic Club's Cultural Heritage Committee, vice president of the Ballarat and District Irish Association, life member of the Murray-Darling Association, and most recently, Phillip has been working with the Eureka Centre Community Advisory Committee on a 10-year plan. Please welcome Phillip to speak to the significance of the Charter.
Thanks for the opportunity, Anthony, and also, like others, I also recognise the Indigenous people of this country and their great contribution as custodians of the land. So let's start. At Eureka in 1854, people from some 30 or more nations swore an oath under the flag of the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other and fight to defend their rights and liberties. An oath which is encapsulated and expressed in further detail in the Ballarat Reform League Charter. These people wanted to establish their own Australian values, to become more independent of Britain, to be recognised as global citizens in this land, and the opportunity, and to further develop a multicultural country. Nevertheless, we often hear comments that the story and events of Eureka are contentious. So let me state clearly that there are certain basic facts about Eureka that are not disputable. They are: there were 3 monster meetings of over 10,000 people at Bakery Hill. There was a Ballarat Reform League Charter proclaiming democratic demands and principles. There was a Eureka flag that was made. There were a series of delegations and petitions by the diggers to the Governor and the Goldfields Commissioner. The battle at Eureka Stockade, it was a battle at the Eureka Stockade where the diggers fought to defend their rights and liberties and were prepared to die for it. There was an acquittal in Melbourne of all those diggers charged with treason. And finally, there were democratic parliamentary outcomes that came as a result of Eureka and its charter, which influenced not only Australia but the world. May I suggest to you that these events and actions are intrinsic to and are the very essence of the Eureka story, its meaning and purpose. They are not disputable. So let's not contend the basic stories of Eureka. Furthermore, each of them is related to, underscored and stimulated by the Ballarat Reform League Charter, and each of them is a democratic action. The government, however, did the opposite. They initiated secret codes, used spies, planned a secret police network and sent provocateurs among the diggers to stir up trouble. And finally, spoiling for a fight, the Governor, agreeing with Commissioner Reid, organised the brutal and indiscriminate attack on the diggers at the stockade and others nearby, stating, and I quote, "It is essential to come upon the diggers in the stockade with arms in hand when we can legally crush them and their democratic agitation in one blow." So they were opposing democracy. It says it very clearly. Consequently, I believe it is the Ballarat Reform League Charter that is at the very essence of what Eureka is about. It is a document of democratic demands and principles. It is a manifesto to which the diggers were prepared to die for. Its principles are embedded in our state and federal constitutions. It is resonant with universal democratic values. It is recognised in UNESCO Australian Memory of the World, and it is included in the Victorian Heritage Register. This manifesto is very much like, and as equally important, I believe, as the American Declaration of Independence of 1776, which is respected and cherished so much by the people in America. Steve Brack, patron of the Eureka Centre, said at the 150th anniversary of Eureka, "Eureka is much more than a story. It is a responsibility that we all share. It is a calling to ensure we stay true to the stockade's democratic principles." It is those principles in the Charter which I'd like to emphasise here today. That it is the inalienable right of every citizen, and so those questions have been put before. I'm not interested at this stage in those demands, I'm interested in the principle. It's the principle of it also. Today there are many issues that our democratic system is not adequately addressing, issues such as the environment and so on. Consequently, whilst there are a plethora of major challenges and inadequacies facing our democracy, let us not forget our Australian democracy nevertheless is one of the oldest and is considered one of the most stable democracies in the world. We ought to be proud of it, protect it, enhance it. The question is, do we value it or take it for granted? This is the major point I want to make. Consequently, it's my hope that when people, and especially the young, come to visit the Eureka Centre, that they can view a copy of the Ballarat Reform League Charter that is hopefully and should be given the prominence it deserves in place and the size in the centre. It is important that people are encouraged to read this charter and understand its importance and meaning, not only as applied at the time of Eureka, but as it applies to us now. Sorry I couldn't, there's a couple of other things I wanted to say. Could I just say this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. There's just one thing I'd like to do because it's been brought up today. I do have a copy of the Ballarat Reform League Charter. I've got 60 in my hand. This is the exact copy of the Ballarat Reform League Charter, and I'd like every one of you to take it home with you. It's worth having and it's worth reading.
Thank you. So our final speaker is Heather Horrocks. Heather is an artist, writer and activist. She is a life member of the Footscray Community Arts Centre and was active in Footscray's arts community for over 20 years. She is one of the Pikelets with Mark Dobson, a performance art duo who reference all things Ballarat, sport the Eureka flag apron and perform wherever there is an audience. Heather is currently working on a community knitting project in response to the Eureka flag. Please welcome Heather.
Hello everybody. I'd also like to acknowledge the First Nations people, and I love the fact that we've got native flowers and leaves here. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Now I'm going to talk about Secret St Paul and a bit about things that I call what's her name issues. So I stand here with my feminist colours on. I'm a craftist and I wear a white crocheted poppy for peace. So you may know red poppies, but after the First World War there was quite a substantial movement that got heavily stamped upon. I wear a black daisy made out of recycled videotape because I care for the environment. And the end of days means black daisies. And I usually wear a rock around my neck for the earth. So, I'm an artist with a small a and a crafter and a proud feminist. Now, you need to know two other things, because I'm really here under false pretences. I'm here to tell you that Ballarat has been declared a craft and folk arts centre by UNESCO. And the second thing is that, yes, we are remaking the Eureka flag, some of us, in granny squares, and we believe this will wash through some of the difficulties that people have with the flag. It'll be full size, and anybody who can crochet, follow me out the door. Now, my Auntie Violet taught me to knit. She had long hairs on her face and a slight twitch. Grandma Jessie taught me to crochet. She liked the races, and when she was dressed up, she had a full fox, eyes, all the little claws that she wore round her neck. She married my grandfather Jack. I loved my grandfather Jack. He was the son of Emma Jemima MacDonald of Piggereet. She was the great-granddaughter of a woman who arrived on the Lady Juliana. And I'm sorry, Juliana, that it wasn't a good ship. Anyway, as it turned out, my grandfather was a bigamist, ran an illegal tote, and told a lot of lies. And I'm telling you this because all my life of crafting, I've listened to secrets. I can't tell you how many secrets I know because I'm a quiet crafter. And I'll come back to that in a minute. I'm the first generation of women who had equality within their grasp. Access to reliable contraception, free tertiary education for a while, the capacity to enter the workforce and stay there, to hold down a full-time job and to make a career. But I'm a daughter of the women who, after the Second World War, went back to the kitchen and housework. Now, as a feminist in the 60s, I was instrumental in stopping women knitting through meetings, because that's what happened. No matter where you were, church, sport, politics, hospital, whatever, while they waited up the back to turn the urn on and serve the tea and scones. I want to tell you one other thing about art. I once asked, there's a huge debate that continues about the difference between art and craft. Now, I once asked a lovely young woman who was in the art business, and I said, "What is your definition?" And she said, "Art is useless." Now, the flag needs to be acknowledged as Australia's greatest craft object because it was probably made by women. I understand there's some debate. I don't know why, but apparently there is. What women? Well, and again, the historians will say we don't really know. Well, why don't we know? Because women couldn't vote and were not offered the vote. They lost all rights to property if they married, but they nonetheless chose, these women of the goldfields, a dangerous, traitorous path. Really, it was sedition to make that flag. It wasn't a British flag, it was a brand new flag. They are lost to history, like so many women, often because they lose their names when they marry, but also because they choose to be silent partners in their endeavours. And I could mention St Paul, but I won't. It's all his fault. Back to the flag. The flag is enormous and heavy, except it's made with dress fabric. And clever women kept the secret of its making because it was not made by a tent maker or a sail maker. It was made by women quietly and in secret. The ultimate peaceful protest, and it was made frugally because that's what women do with their craft. So we need this flag, this craft object, preserved, honoured and accessible. It represents all the what's-her-names of history. It belongs to women, and it was the great peaceful protest. There were guns, but this was a beautiful, powerful, peaceful protest, and that's why I think it beats the Charter.
All right, thanks very much. That concludes our Eureka Soapbox number 2. We'd really like to thank all our speakers for being with us today, but most importantly, thank the audience for your support for Eureka Sunday. It's something we really want to see grow over time. The weather was miserable today, as I'm sure you'll probably all agree, but it's a good start in the right direction. So that ends our this session, and we now return to the studio.
Live across Ballarat on this Eureka Day from our new broadcast centre at Berkeley Square. We launch a new Voice FM 99.9 for you, about you and our community.